This is Indian History Thali by Thali, where we ask archaeologists and historians how they know what they know about India's past. In this series, we will focus on Indian history through the lens of food.
Did you know that the cup of tea you or your family might start the day with wasn't always part of everyday life in India? In fact, it only really becomes a popular habit in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. What feels so ordinary today slowly made its back into daily routines back then, as tea moved from being a colonial import to something people began to sip at homes, on street corners, and at railway stops across the country. This was part of a larger shift at a time when food habits and social practices were changing among the urban elite. In many households, milk powders and biscuits, as well as cooks and domestic help, were becoming a more regular part of home life, all while most people across the country were still struggling to eat 2 full meals a day. In this video, historians Utsa and Maithili Tagare discuss the new foods, new rules, and new anxieties about women and health faced by modern urban Indians in Bengal and Maharashtra in the late 19th and early 20th century. To understand how this new world of food was introduced, we can start in a very public space, an exhibition.
We look at the example of foods that were at display at one of this exhibition in early 20th century, say around 1906 and 7. Indian industrial and agricultural exhibition, you do see, the example of foods that were on display. For example, chocolates, milk powder, variety of condensed milk made by Indian companies, not just, European companies, but by Indian companies from all over India, were displayed at the exhibition. This exhibition demonstrated the straight fact that products which one has never heard of in India before not only became available in the market, but they had also started being manufactured in the country itself.
These new foods were not just being displayed in exhibitions, they were beginning to shape social occasions and celebrations like weddings.
If you look at the new social faces, that is also a way of finding out how dietary changes were reflected in everyday lives of people. There are many menu cards that were being written for the weddings, for example. And writing a menu card became a distinctive feature. They were symptomatic not just of changes taking place in the social feasts, but also of changes in the nature of food that had to be consumed. For example, there's this wedding menu card of a wedding that was taking place in Calcutta in 1920s. Shows a very long list of food. The card was divided into different sections. It had say a vegetarian section, then non-vegetarian, which was again divided into fish and meat, finger food, pickles, fresh fruits, dried fruits, desserts, juices, a number of things. So, these are a few sources. If we look at them, we do know that what we know as Bengali food, what constituted what is known as Bengali food, was changing at the turn of the 20th century.
But these changes weren't happening only in Bengal. Across Western India, food cultures were also being reshaped in different ways. We have, of course, an influx of new fruits and vegetables brought to India by the Europeans. Foods like potatoes, cauliflower, cabbage, chilies, tomatoes, and so many others. These items were now becoming part of everyday meals.
And a very interesting aspect that is happening here in Western India is that it's not just ingredients, but also a lot of cooking techniques are being borrowed. For instance, the technique of baking was borrowed directly from the British. And this particular technique was picked up by one community in Western India called the Pathare Prabhus. So the Pathare Prabhus were an educationally advanced community. They worked in the bureaucracy alongside other upper castes. And there's a very interesting story about how the Pathare Prabhu community took the English shepherd's pie and made it their own. So, unlike the English version, where it's made with minced meat and then covered with a layer of mashed potatoes, what the Pathare Prabhus did is that they're avid consumers of seafood. So instead of meat, they started filling this pie with prawns, which was sautéed with onions and typical Pathare Prabhu spices, and then they would cover it up with a crust of mashed potatoes. And ultimately, this was not even called the shepherd's pie any longer. It came to be called karandi pie or prawn pie, for instance.
But this expanding world of food was not experienced equally, was it?
So true. This is, the changes that you actually see was definitely reflected more in the diets of the middle class. So people in the villages and the urban working class did not even have enough to eat. In times of scarcity, what we see is, especially in the villages, people would survive on snails or the kind of greens that grew around the ponds. In fact, it was revealed in a survey on the famous Bengal famine of 1943 that the day laborers, petty agriculturalists, artisans, and traders who formed more than 65% of the population of Bengal could not afford to pay for milk, meat, eggs, even vegetables or sweets. So you see, they were already malnourished. They were already suffering from malnutrition when the famine struck.
But access to food was only one part of the story. The other was how food was prepared inside the home and who did the cooking.
Mainly, there were two aspects to the changes in the Bengali kitchen. Women had to be instructed on how to cook. Why? Why the instruction? Because women also now had to be skilled in making new food, which they often did not know. And also another phenomenon, the rise of male cooks, especially in urban centers of Bengal. And these are the male cooks who mostly migrated from neighboring Orissa.
With Odia cooks becoming a regular part of Calcutta households, there seemed an increased concern about the role of women in family life. And this concern showed up in everyday conversation.
You will find a number of proverbs on such women, such modern women. One such proverb ridiculed educated women for their inability to cook. I'm just translating the proverb here. When women wear shoes, rice and vegetables get burnt. So here shoes kind of indicated the new changes, modernity. So the new women were blamed for their dependence on hired cooks, who would be males.
By the late 19th century, migration from Odisha into colonial Calcutta had grown significantly, and many Odia men found work as hired cooks in Bengali homes. Brahmin cooks were particularly valued in upper caste households, where strict ideas about ritual purity governed the kitchen.
The demand for Brahmin cooks increased to such an extent that often cooks from other castes would fake their caste identity. They would just put on a sacred thread to show that they were Brahmins to get the job as a Brahmin cook. These were mostly, as I said, men from Orissa. And these men were constantly ridiculed by the natives of Calcutta. Although from late 19th century, you will find in almost all Bengali households, there were either Oriya cooks or Oriya domestic help.
In Western India, too, women's education was becoming a key concern. By the late 1880s, there was a surge in efforts to educate women. But this was closely followed by anxieties about how women's education would affect family life. Cookbooks began to appear, often claiming in their forewords that their intent was to help save women of embarrassment in their marital homes when they arrived not knowing how to cook. Professor Tagare tells us more.
By the early 20th century, we also start seeing that many Marathi medium girls' schools have begun to incorporate a particular subject called Arogya Shastra. So, in the lower classes, we see that this particular theme of Arogya Shastra, through this theme, girls were taught how to clean utensils, how to fold clothes properly, how the bedding should be made. But gradually, over time, till the girls reach the end of primary education, I think till about class 6, they were gradually taught how to treat common ailments using household ingredients, how to treat fever, how to treat constipation, in case anybody in the family had it. And then gradually, we see that there is an even more emphasis on nutritional science, the correct techniques to cook particular ingredients, to make particular dishes, how a nourishing meal should be prepared for the entire family. And in the sixth grade, in class six, we clearly see a change where women are taught about how to prepare baby food, how one needs to take care of newborn babies, what kind of home nursing skills does the mother require. Sort of very nicely preparing these young women for their future role as wives, as mothers, as caregivers, as a message that women are forgetting their culinary skills, sort of, and the fact that they're stepping out of the house sort of comes back to the whole idea that they need to be firmly anchored uh, in the house itself.
But concerns about the Indian household weren't just limited to the changing role of women in the kitchen or their education. As Western medicines and foods became more common, food was drawn out of the kitchen and into nationalist debate.
And we actually have Ayurvedic practitioners known as the Vaidyas of Maharashtra, who come out with their own pamphlets and publications telling people how easily a concoction or a kadha can be prepared at home. In fact, there is a very interesting article written by Dr. Likhite, once again, somewhere around 1925, where he particularly targets the consumption of tea. That people now drink tea on an empty stomach. The breakfast now comprises just drinking tea, having two biscuits, and then running off to work. One of the primary reasons of the declining health of the population, why we're not able to emerge as a strong nation. And he paints this picture about a typical dish which is called varan bhat in Marathi. Varan is basically a simple lentil preparation using boiled pigeon peas. Bhat is rice. So he says that the mound of rice on your plate, uh, just think of this mound of rice on your plate as the Shivalinga, with a little bit of varan or this lentil preparation put on it, and add a little bit of ghee to this ghee. You think of this ghee as the flowing waters of the Ganga, the one that flows from Shiva's head. So when we have such simple and simple down to earth foods that are also in their own way spiritual, why do we need to rely on items like tea and biscuits?
From exhibitions and wedding menus to kitchens, cookbooks, and debates over tea, food in urban India was being reorganized in many ways by the turn of the 20th century. Across our Thali by Thali series, food has never been simple or straightforward. It is always shaped by the worlds around it. The cup of tea that seems so ordinary today emerged from a world of arguments about health, modernity, class, and nationhood.